The sound of a heavy key turning in a lock. That's the sound that woke me up. Not the sound of birds, not the morning sun, but the sound of a prison. I was 82 years old, and I was a prisoner. My cell was a cold room in a convent. And my jailer? It was Ryan, my own nephew. He didn't just lock me away. He conspired with doctors to have me declared senile, drugged me, and stole 82 years of my life, all to get his hands on my condo and my savings. What do you do when the person who was supposed to protect you becomes your predator? When your kindness is met with unimaginable cruelty? Let me know your name and where you're listening from. Because that day, I learned that hell isn't a place of fire. Hell is a cold room where the person you loved most has left you to slowly die. Hello, my dears. I am Margaret. And this is the story of how I fought to get my life back. That first day in the convent, I banged on the door until my hands were numb. I screamed until my voice was raw in my throat. When the door finally opened, it was a little old nun, all hunched over, with a face that looked more scared than I was. "You need to calm down," she said, with that thick accent from rural Missouri. "You are here for your own good." Your nephew explained the whole situation. What situation? What was she talking about? The nun left and returned with a glass of water and some crackers hard as rock. "The Mother Superior will speak with you when you are calmer. Dr. Ryan left medications that you must take." I widened my eyes. Medications? What medications? I didn't take anything but a little pill for my blood pressure. I spent that day hovering between despair and confusion. The stone walls seemed to close in around me. The cold seeped into my bones. But it wasn't just the Missouri winter. It was the cold of betrayal, of disbelief, of abandonment. My own nephew. Why? What did he gain by stuffing me in this godforsaken place? The room had only a narrow bed, a nightstand with a Bible on it, a crucifix on the wall, and a wooden chair that creaked like a horror movie door. Through the small window, I could see a patch of a neglected garden and, in the distance, fog-covered hills, no sign of civilization. I felt my heart tighten, as if an invisible hand were crushing it. I'm old, but I'm not senile, I thought to myself. There was something very wrong going on. Late in the afternoon, the so-called Mother Superior appeared. She was a tall, thin woman with small, penetrating eyes. She had deep wrinkles around her mouth, as if she had spent her entire life pursing her lips in disapproval. "Mrs. Collins," she began, sitting in the chair while I remained on the edge of the bed. "I understand your confusion, but you must understand that you are here to receive the care appropriate to your condition." "What condition?" I wanted to scream, but I held back. I had to keep a clear head to understand this crazy situation. The Mother Superior continued. "Your nephew, Dr. Ryan, came to us very concerned. He said you have been showing signs of early onset dementia, that you are becoming a danger to yourself." "Dementia?" I almost laughed in her face. I might be 82, but my mind worked better than many young people out there. I remembered dates, names, addresses, prescriptions. I had stored in my memory every detail of the more than 2,000 children I helped deliver. I never made a mistake in my checkbook, read without glasses, did difficult crossword puzzles. This could only be a terrible mistake. "Mother," I said, trying to maintain my composure, "there has been an error. I do not have dementia. My nephew must have been mistaken. I need to use a phone. Call him. Clarify this." The nun pressed her lips together, reinforcing the wrinkles. "Unfortunately, we do not have a phone available for the residents. It's part of the treatment. Isolation helps with spiritual recovery. Dr. Ryan specifically requested that you have no contact with the outside world, for now, for your own good." It was then that fear turned to anger. What was this? Treatment? Isolation for my own good? I shot up from the bed in a burst of energy that surprised even me. "Look here. You are being deceived. I have no illness. My nephew is lying, and I need to get out of here now." The Mother Superior did not flinch. She took an official document from her pocket with letterheads and stamps. "Mrs. Collins, your nephew has legal guardianship over you. You have been declared incapable of managing your own life. It's all here, signed by 3 doctors and a judge. Just a few signatures on a piece of paper, and a person's entire life is stolen. This is how easily the elderly can be silenced. But they severely underestimated Margaret's mind, and she is about to start fighting back. 3 doctors and a judge. Isn't that laughable? Just a few pieces of paper, a few lies, and they can erase an elderly person's entire life. They never even spoke to me, never even looked me in the eye. That is how this world sometimes treats those of us who are past our prime. My dears, they don't see us until they want what we have. The Convent of St. Clair received a generous donation for your lifetime care. We suggest you accept the situation and try to find peace. I took the paper with trembling hands. I recognized Ryan's signature at the bottom, alongside others I didn't identify. I felt as if the world had collapsed on my head. My nephew, whom I raised since he was a boy, who held my hand at Arthur's funeral, who called me Mommy when he was little, had declared me insane and thrown me into a convent, lost in the middle of nowhere. Why? What did he gain from this? The answer hit me like a punch to the gut. My condo in Kansas City, overlooking the city skyline. My life savings as a nurse, Arthur's pension, everything I built in 82 years of honest life and hard work. When the Mother Superior left, I collapsed on the bed and cried like I hadn't cried since my husband's death. I cried tears of anger, sadness, and helplessness. I felt like a fool, a silly old woman who trusted too much. The hot tears streamed down my wrinkled face, soaking the hard pillow. Outside, the sky darkened and brought more cold into those stone walls. The convent was old, one of those built in the 19th century, with thick walls that didn't let the heat in. It was January 2012, deep winter in the Midwest. I shivered from cold and dread as I tried to organize my thoughts. There had to be a way out. I couldn't accept this. I was not going to end my days in this prison, disguised as a spiritual retreat. I slept poorly that first night, waking up at every noise, the creaking of old wood, the wind howling through the corridors, the nuns' chants at matins. Everything frightened me. When the sun rose, a different nun from the day before entered carrying a tray. She was younger, despite the wrinkles, and had kind eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Collins. I am Sister Agnes. I brought your breakfast and your medicine." I looked at the colorful pills on the small tray and shook my head. "I don't take those medications. I never have. I only use one for my blood pressure, which is white, and none of these are it." The nun seemed confused, but the doctor left very clear instructions. "You need to take them to stay calm and not hurt yourself." That's when I understood everything. Ryan wanted to drug me, keep me sedated in that place until I wasted away. The pills weren't for dementia. They were tranquilizers, strong ones, the kind that leave a person dizzy, confused, almost vegetative. As a nurse, I recognize some by their color and shape. This is the moment the fog clears. They weren't trying to care for her. They were trying to drug her into submission. Her sharp mind was her only weapon, and she just learned how to use it to survive. "Sister," I said, trying to sound as docile as possible, "I'm allergic to these medications. Dr. Ryan must have forgotten to mention it. The last time I took them, I had a terrible reaction. I almost died." I lied shamelessly, of course. But what else could I do? Yes, I lied. An 82-year-old woman, lying through her teeth to a nun. But you see, my dears, when you are cornered, you don't fight fair. You fight to survive. My mind was the only weapon I had left, and I was not going to let Ryan take it from me with a handful of pills. Sometimes, a clever lie is stronger than any sword. The nun hesitated, her face contracting in sincere worry. "Oh, heavens, we don't want to cause you harm. I will consult the Mother Superior about this." This small victory gave me hope. If I could avoid the medication, I could keep my mind clear. I could plan an escape, get help. But I soon discovered that my situation was even more complicated than I imagined. That convent wasn't like the modern ones in the middle of the city. It was isolated on top of a hill in the Ozarks, miles from the nearest village. There were only 3 resident nuns, the Mother Superior, Sister Agnes, and a third, even older one, named Sister Teresa, who could barely walk. The place was practically abandoned, functioning only as a refuge for those nuns who were too old to be transferred. During the first few days, I pretended to take the medicine, hiding it under my tongue and later flushing it down the toilet in the communal bathroom during the rare moments I was allowed to use it. I observed everything, trying to find a gap to escape. The windows had old but sturdy bars. The main door was always locked, with the key hanging around the Mother Superior's neck. The walls were too high for me to climb, especially with my knees worn out from decades of carrying the weight of pregnant women. I felt like a bird trapped in a rusty cage, beating its wings against bars that wouldn't budge. One morning, while having breakfast in the empty refectory, the nuns let me eat alone. Perhaps afraid I'd have an episode, I heard the Mother Superior talking to Sister Agnes in the hallway. "The doctor called yesterday," she said in a low voice. "He asked if his aunt is adjusting well. He said he sold her apartment in Kansas City. It was too large for one person. He's going to use the money to ensure her treatment here. He didn't just sell her condo. He sold 42 years of her memories with Arthur. It's a cruelty that cuts deeper than the betrayal itself. Now Margaret knows for sure. This isn't a mistake. It's a theft. And she's paying for her own prison. He was using my money to pay for my prison. Do you understand? It wasn't just a condo. It was 42 years of memories with Arthur. It was my husband's books, our photographs, our life, and he sold it off like an old chair. That kind of cruelty, sometimes, it hurts even more than the first betrayal. My blood ran cold. The bastard had already sold my condo. That condo that Arthur and I bought with so much sacrifice, making mortgage payments for 20 years. The place where I kept all my memories, my photographs, my husband's books, my entire life. Sold off as if I were already dead. Sister Agnes seemed to hesitate. "Mother, don't you find it strange? Mrs. Collins doesn't seem confused or violent at all, as the doctor described. She's articulate, polite. In these 10 days, she hasn't shown any worrying behavior." Bless this nun. At least someone there had eyes to see the obvious. The Mother Superior sighed loudly. "Sister, we must not question. Dr. Ryan is a renowned physician, a specialist in geriatrics. He knows his aunt's condition better than we do. Besides, the donation he made will ensure our survival for at least 5 years. You know we are on the verge of closing." Ah, so that was it. Money. Ryan had bought these nuns using my own money. That's right. Even in a place meant to be holy, money still talks. I don't entirely blame them. Financial desperation can make people do things they never thought they would. But the fact remains. I was sold, and it was my own money that paid for the cage. I almost let out a scream of indignation, but stopped myself in time. If I wanted to get out of there, I needed to be smarter than my traitorous nephew. That same afternoon, I began to plan my first escape attempt. The convent was large and poorly maintained, with several abandoned wings. During my therapeutic walks in the cloister, always accompanied by Sister Agnes, I had observed a side door that led to the gardens. It was locked, but the lock looked old and rusty. If I could get any kind of tool, maybe I could force it. At dinner time, I hid a metal spoon in the pocket of the worn-out robe the nuns had given me. At night, when everyone was asleep, I tried to dismantle the doorknob of my door, using the spoon as a screwdriver. I made as much silence as possible, but the screws were rusty and creaked with every turn. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I hurried back to bed and pretended to sleep, my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode in my chest. The door opened, and the Mother Superior's silhouette appeared against the dim light of the hallway. She stood there watching me for a few minutes, then left, closing the door again. I let out the breath I didn't realize I was holding. My first attempt had failed before it even began. In the following days, I became more cautious. I couldn't raise suspicion. I pretended to accept my situation, to be docile and cooperative. "Maybe it's good for me to stay here for a while," I told Sister Agnes during one of our walks, away from the bustle of the city, closer to God. The nun smiled, obviously relieved by my apparent acceptance. "That's wonderful, Mrs. Collins. You will see how the peace of this place helps heal the soul." Little did she know that while I smiled docilely, I was studying every piece of that convent, every routine, every schedule. I was determined to get out of there, even if it was the last thing I did. 2 weeks after my arrival, I had my first real opportunity. It was Sunday, Mass Day. A priest came from afar to celebrate for the nuns, and on this special day, the main door was left unlocked. While everyone was in the chapel, I slipped away to the entrance. My heart was nearly pounding out of my chest as I turned the doorknob. The door opened. I felt the fresh morning air on my face and almost cried with joy. I ran down the stone steps faster than I had in decades. Freedom was just a few yards away, but I hadn't counted on the uneven terrain. I had barely taken 100 steps when my foot sank into a hole hidden by tall grass. I heard the crack before I even felt the pain. My ankle had twisted badly. I fell to the ground, biting my lips to keep from screaming. Tears of frustration streamed down my face as I tried to get up, but it was impossible. The pain was excruciating. The pain in my ankle was one thing, but the despair in my heart was 10 times worse. That feeling of having freedom right in your grasp, clench his fist, only to have it cruelly snatched away. That was the moment I almost gave up. I almost accepted my fate. But almost. Almost doesn't mean I did. I lay there on the damp grass until Mass ended, and they noticed I was missing. It was Sister Agnes who found me, her face contorted with genuine worry. "Mrs. Collins, what happened?" I swallowed my pride and anger. "I wanted to take a walk, see the sunrise. I tripped in this hole." She didn't believe me, of course, but she pretended to accept my explanation. They carried me back inside, my ankle already swelling up like a baseball. The Mother Superior looked at me with a mixture of disapproval and pity. "See what happens when you don't follow the rules? Dr. Ryan was right. You are a danger to yourself." I wanted to scream in her face that the danger was my nephew, who was robbing me, imprisoning me, killing me slowly. But I said nothing. I needed to think of another plan, another way. That attempt had failed, but it wouldn't be the last. As long as I was breathing, as long as my brain still worked, I would fight to regain my freedom and my dignity. That night, lying in the hard bed, my ankle wrapped and throbbing with pain, I looked through the small window at the stars shining in the dark Missouri sky. Was Ryan there in Kansas City, in my condo, sleeping in my bed, spending my money? Did he think of me, abandoned in this cold convent? Or had he already crossed me off his life, like crossing a name off a completed to-do list? Despair threatened to swallow me, but I fought against it. My grandmother, Beatrice, a respected midwife and healer in Boonville, always used to say, "Crying doesn't solve anything, my child. Salt water is only good for baptizing a ship." I dried my tears with the back of my hands and promised myself, this won't be the end. Somehow, I was going to get out of that place and make Ryan pay for every day of suffering he was causing me. But wait, before I go straight to the end, I have to start this story from the beginning of my life so you can understand how I ended up in that convent, alone and betrayed. You only understand the present when you know the past, as my grandmother Beatrice used to say. And this old woman's past has its twists and turns, its ups and downs, like a river winding before it reaches the sea. I was born in Boonville, among those imposing Ozark Mountains, in 1930. It was a small town back then, where everyone knew everyone. My father, Walter, had a general store on the main street that sold a little bit of everything, from matches and kerosene to fabric and buttons. An honest, hard-working man, the kind who woke up with the first rooster and only stopped when his body couldn't take it anymore. My mother, Clara, was a respected midwife throughout the region. She didn't have formal schooling, no. She learned the craft from her mother, my grandmother Beatrice, who was what they called a woman of virtue, midwife, healer, and knower of all the secrets of the mountain plants. Our house was simple, but there was never a lack of food on the table, or love for the 3 daughters. I was the middle child, between Emily and Sharon. The backyard was my favorite place, full of medicinal plants that my mother and grandmother cultivated with care. There was everything there: lemon balm to calm, pennyroyal for bronchitis, stonebreaker for the kidneys, boldo for the stomach, lemongrass for fever, and many others that the townspeople didn't even know the names of. Since I was a little girl, I would stand there watching my grandmother Beatrice prepare the remedies, learning the names, the uses, the right combinations. "Be careful with this one, Margaret," she would say, pointing to a tiny leafed plant. "In the right dose, it cures. In the wrong dose, it buries." And I recorded everything as if my head were a library. My grandmother Beatrice was quite a figure. Short, always in a dark dress and her white hair in a bun, but with a spark in her eyes that showed more youth than many young girls. She knew every plant in the Ozark Mountains, knew the right time to harvest, the proper moon phase for each preparation. She had a memory that was otherworldly. She remembered the name of every child she had helped deliver, the date, even the exact time. She told me, "Margaret, your head is just like mine. What goes in there doesn't come out. God gave you this gift to use to help others." And wasn't she right? I inherited that memory, which was almost a burden. I forgot nothing, even if I wanted to. Maybe that's why Ryan chose dementia, of all things, as the excuse to commit me. It was the furthest thing from my reality. When I was about 10 years old, my grandmother gave me a gift that I've treasured my whole life. A dark leather-bound notebook with pages yellowed by time. Inside, written in that neat handwriting of someone who learned to write late in life, were all the medicinal recipes she had collected over more than 70 years of practice. There was everything in there. Teas, poultices, tinctures, ointments. Each recipe came with the precise indication, the correct dosage, the preparation method. "Guard this with your life, girl," she told me when she handed me the notebook. "This knowledge is more valuable than gold. But hide it well, because some people don't like women knowing these things." I did hide that notebook, especially after my grandmother passed from this world in 1945. I kept it under the mattress, then in a false bottom my father made in a dresser drawer. When I got married, I took it hidden in my suitcase, and with every house move, it was the first thing I packed and the last thing I unpacked, always finding a safe hiding spot. In the Kansas City apartment, it was kept inside an old cookie tin in the back of the kitchen cabinet. No one would ever value that rusty tin, except me, who knew the treasure it held. I can't say I had a difficult childhood, but it wasn't easy either. Studying as a woman in the 1940s was a challenge. My father, despite being a man of his time, had advanced ideas. "My daughters will have an education," he would say, contradicting neighbors who thought educating girls was a waste. I walked to school, about 2 miles on a dirt road, rain or shine, but I went happily because I knew that every day in school was a day closer to realizing my dream. To be a nurse. Ever since I was little, watching my mother and grandmother care for others, I knew this was my path too. I finished what they called junior high, top of my class. I wanted to keep studying, take the normal course, then try for nursing. But around that time, my father got sick, a heart problem that none of my mother's or grandmother's remedies could completely cure. The store started losing money. Money got tight. My sisters had already married, started their families. Emily had gone to Springfield with her husband, a USPS employee. Sharon was in street, Louis, married to an accountant. It fell to me to help in the store, care for my sick father, and lend a hand to my mother with the more difficult births. It was during this time that I learned to be stubborn. My dreams seemed more and more distant, but I didn't give up. At night, after the store closed and my parents went to sleep, I studied by lamplight with books borrowed from Miss Joyce, who believed in me. "You have the brains to be more than a store clerk, Margaret," she would say. "Don't give up." And I didn't. When my father passed away in 1952, we used the insurance money to pay off the store's debts and close the business. My mother went to live with Emily in Springfield, and I, at 22, took what little I had and went to street. Louis, living in a tiny rented room and trying to get into the Barnes Jewish College Goldfarb School of Nursing. It wasn't easy, but who said good things come easy? I worked during the day as a clerk at a pharmacy downtown and studied at night. I passed the school's entrance exam, but I still needed money for tuition. That's when Grandma Beatrice's notebook saved me for the first time. I started preparing homemade remedies for the neighborhood folks. Cough syrups, ointments for wounds, teas for stomach aches. I charged little, but it was enough to supplement what I earned at the pharmacy. I managed to graduate as a nurse in 1958, against all odds. It was a man's world back then. In hospitals, doctors treated nurses like servants, not professionals. Nurses are for changing sheets and bathing patients. A smug little doctor told me at my first job at Mercy Hospital. I swallowed hard and replied, "Doctor, with all due respect, a nurse is a health professional who saves lives while you sleep soundly at home." I was almost fired for that response. But an older doctor, Dr. Gregory, who had heard everything, interceded for me. "She's right," he told the director. And besides, she's the best nurse I've seen in 30 years of practice. I specialized in obstetrics because it was what I knew from a young age. Watching my mother and grandmother, I liked helping bring children into the world, seeing that joy when everything went well, being able to make a difference at such an important moment. I worked in several hospitals in St. Louis, gradually earning respect. I wasn't just good at what I did, I was exceptional. I had delicate but firm hands, an attentive gaze that missed no detail, and above all, that prodigious memory that allowed me to remember every case, every complication, every solution. Doctors started calling me for the difficult cases, to give my opinion, to help in emergencies. The nurse who's worth 10, they called me. It was at an obstetrics conference in 1966 that I met Arthur. He was a biology professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, OMKC, and was presenting research on maternal nutrition. I was already 36, an age many considered an old maid back then. I had had a few boyfriends, but nothing serious. My career always came first. Arthur was different from all the men I had known. He respected my profession, was interested in my work, treated me as an equal. He was 5 years younger than me, which caused whispers, of course. Cradle robber, they called me behind my back, as if I had stolen a baby from the cradle. But I didn't care. When love truly arrives, age is just a number. We married in 1968, and I moved to Kansas City. It was hard to leave St. Louis, where I had already built a solid career, but Arthur was worth the sacrifice. And besides, I soon got a job at St. Luke's Hospital, where I worked for over 30 years. We bought a small apartment near the university, which we later exchanged for a larger one, overlooking the city skyline, in the Brookside neighborhood. It was our little corner, our treasure. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, had a story. The walls were impregnated with our laughter, our dreams, our late-night conversations. I never had children. Not for lack of trying, but simply because my body didn't cooperate. We tried some treatments, but nothing worked. Arthur said it didn't matter, that we were complete with each other. Sometimes it hurt to see so many babies born in my hands, knowing I would never have one of my own. But life has its ways of compensating. In 1976, my youngest sister Sharon and her husband died in a car accident in St. Louis. They left a 2-year-old son, Ryan. I didn't think twice. Arthur and I brought him to live with us in Kansas City. Ryan was a quiet boy, traumatized by the loss of his parents. In the first few months, he barely spoke, had constant nightmares. Arthur had the patience of a saint with him, spent hours playing chess, teaching him about plants and animals, taking him fishing. Slowly, the boy opened up, smiled more, adapted to his new life. He was incredibly smart, got the best grades in school. When he was about 15, he announced he wanted to be a doctor. "Because of you, Aunt Margaret," he told me. "Seeing how you help people, I want to do the same." Oh, memory. It's both a blessing and a curse, isn't it? When he said those words, my heart swelled with pride. I thought I had done something right. Slight shake of the head. And now, look at us. How terribly ironic. The boy who wanted to help people began by destroying the very person who taught him how. I felt my chest swell with pride that day. It wasn't easy to pay for medical school, even with both of us working. When Ryan got into college in 1982, we took out a mortgage on the house to ensure he would have everything he needed. Housing, food, books, decent clothes. It's an investment in his future, Arthur would say, and I agreed. We worked double shifts, saved every penny. Ryan deserved that chance. And besides, he was like a son to us, the son we could never have. He graduated with honors, did his residency in geriatrics. Irony of fate, specializing in the care of the elderly. He opened his own practice, started giving lectures, became well known in the field. It seemed like all our sacrifice had been worth it. We were as proud of him as if he were our own blood. When they called him Dr. Ryan, my heart filled with joy. It was as if a part of me had managed to reach where I never could. Arthur retired in 1995, but continued to teach as a volunteer at the university. I retired in 2000, after more than 40 years of caring for expectant mothers and newborns. We had a comfortable life, not rich, but without financial worries. The condo was paid off. We had a reasonable savings account and our 2 pensions. We traveled a bit, saw places we always dreamed of visiting. Those were the golden years, reaping the rewards of a life of honest work. Ryan got married, had 2 children, visited us regularly, brought the kids. It seemed like everything was as it should be, until 2008, when the unthinkable happened. Arthur had a massive stroke while teaching one of his volunteer classes. There wasn't even time to call me. When I arrived at the hospital, he was already gone. 40 years of marriage, of companionship, of a quiet but deep love. Over in an instant, I felt as if half of me had been forcibly ripped away. It was Ryan who took care of everything. The funeral, the paperwork, the bureaucracy. He gave me a shoulder to cry on, stayed with me on the nights I couldn't sleep alone in that bed that suddenly seemed far too large. "I'll take care of you, Auntie," he promised. "Just like you and Uncle Arthur took care of me." And I believed him, of course. Why wouldn't I? He was my nephew, the boy I raised, the pride of my life. The following years were about adjusting to solo life. It wasn't easy, but I managed. I had my friends, my book clubs. I did volunteer work at the hospital where I had worked, supporting new mothers. My health was good for my age. I only took blood pressure medication. I took my walks on the park trails, every early morning. My mind remained sharp, as always, doing crossword puzzles, reading a lot, keeping up with the news. The longing for Arthur never went away, but the pain became softer, more bearable. The first sign that something was wrong with Ryan appeared in 2011. He came to visit me alone, without his wife and children, which was rare. He seemed nervous, restless. After lunch, as we were having coffee on the balcony, he dropped the bomb. "Auntie, have you ever thought about selling this condo? It's too big for you. It's a lot of work to maintain. We could buy something smaller, more practical, and use the difference to invest in some experimental treatments I'm researching." I frowned. What was this? I had never mentioned any health problems that required experimental treatments. "What treatments, Ryan?" I asked. He was evasive, said something vague about preventive medicine for the elderly, innovative therapies, quality of life in old age, nothing concrete. I told him I was happy in my condo, that I had too many memories there to get rid of it. He didn't insist that day, but I saw a shadow pass over his face, a poorly disguised annoyance. I thought it was just concern for my well-being. Once again, like a fool, it was greed, pure and simple. He was already eyeing my assets, plotting how to get his hands on them. In the following months, Ryan started showing up more, always alone. He'd ask about my health, if I was taking my medicine correctly, if I wasn't forgetting things. He insisted I go through a full battery of exams, arguing that at my age, prevention is key. I agreed, of course. What harm could it do? The results all came back normal, as I expected. Blood pressure a little high, cholesterol on the borderline, normal things for an 82-year-old. Nothing worrying, nothing that justified major interventions. Even so, he returned to the subject of the condo. "Auntie, a woman alone in this huge condo. It's not safe. What if you fall? What if you get sick? No one will hear, no one will help." I replied that I had attentive neighbors, that I talked to Mrs. Diane from the 4th floor every day, that the doorman, Jerry, always came up to change light bulbs or fix little things. Ryan pressed his lips together, visibly annoyed. "You're too stubborn, just like my mom, Sharon." It was the first time I noticed a real note of irritation in his voice when he spoke to me. In late December 2011, I fell in the kitchen. Nothing serious. I slipped on a rug and hurt my knee. I called Ryan just to let him know. I said I'd put some ointment on it and rest. He insisted I go to the hospital, that I could have fractured something without realizing it. "At your age, any fall can be dangerous," he argued. I ended up giving in. At the hospital, he spoke at length with the doctors, away from me. When he returned, he said they wanted to keep me under observation for 24 hours, as a precaution. It seemed like an exaggeration, but I trusted the medical judgment, and once again, my nephew. It was in that hospital that Ryan executed his diabolical plan. On the second night of my stay, which was supposed to be only 24 hours, but which he managed to extend with some talk with the doctors, I saw him inject something into my IV bag. When I asked what it was, He smiled calmly. Just a mild sedative, Auntie, so you can sleep better. I didn't sleep better. I blacked out completely. And when I woke up, I was in that cold stone room in the convent of St. Clair, miles away from everything I knew. What would you do in my place? Resign yourself and accept the end of your days in that cold convent, or fight against a system that considers the elderly as disposable burdens? Leave your comment. I want to know if there are more fighters or conformists in this world, because in my case, it never crossed my mind to accept that fate. I would never resign myself to ending my days trapped, far from everything I loved, treated as insane or incapable. But I also needed to be smart. There was no point in fighting head-on without a plan. I needed to use the one thing Ryan couldn't take from me: my knowledge, my intelligence, my ability to adapt. And that's when Grandma Beatrice's notebook, the one I'd treasured my whole life, began to be sorely missed. If only I had brought it with me. In those first weeks at the convent, after my ankle healed from the frustrated escape attempt, I watched, studied, looked for openings. The nuns followed a strict routine. They woke up at 5 a.m. for prayers, had breakfast at 7, took care of house chores until noon, ate lunch in silence, rested a bit, and then returned to work until dinner at 6 p.m. After that, more prayers and lights out at 8. The Mother Superior was the only one who had contact with the outside world. She received the priest once a week, went to the nearest village once a month for supplies. She spoke on the phone occasionally with the diocese. The other two nuns, Sister Agnes and Sister Teresa, rarely left the convent. I gradually gained Sister Agnes's trust. She was the youngest of the three, although she was already in her 72nd. She had entered the convent as a teenager and spent her whole life there. She was naive, in a way. She easily believed what she was told. I started helping her with daily chores. I made the beds, swept the floor, helped in the kitchen. "You don't have to do this, Mrs. Collins," she would say, genuinely touched. "You are here to rest." I would smile. "Work is good for the soul, sister, and I need to feel useful." She didn't realize that while I worked, I was exploring every corner of that place, every door, every window, looking for a way out. It was during one of these explorations that I discovered the convent's abandoned library. It was in a wing that was no longer used, with a partially collapsed roof. The shelves were covered in dust and cobwebs, but the books were still there. Hundreds of them, many in Latin, others in Old English. Theology, philosophy, geography, but also medical books. Books on medicinal plants, manuscripts from nuns who, like my grandmother Beatrice, knew nature's healing secrets. I felt my heart race. Maybe the key was here, not only to endure my captivity, but to find a way back to freedom. I won't lie to you. After discovering that abandoned library, I felt a spark of hope ignite within me. But the path from prison to freedom was more winding and painful than I could have imagined. In those first months at the convent, I tried to escape 2 more times, besides that first one with the sprained ankle. I don't give up easily. I never have. The second attempt was a month later, when my ankle had improved. I observed that on Sundays after Mass, the Mother Superior used to leave the back door open for a few minutes while she walked the priest to the main gate. I planned everything carefully. I pretended to have a headache to skip Mass. As soon as everyone left the chapel, I ran as silently as possible to the back door. It was open, as I predicted. I went out into the yard and hid behind some bushes, waiting for the right moment to run to the wall. My heart was beating so hard I thought they would hear it from afar. But I hadn't counted on one detail. The priest's dog, a yellow mutt that accompanied him on all his visits, and that, on that day, decided to sniff precisely the bushes where I was hiding. It started barking like crazy, drawing everyone's attention. In seconds, I was surrounded by the Mother Superior, the priest, an elderly man who seemed as surprised as I was, and the 2 nuns. I was just getting some fresh air. I tried to explain, but no one bought it. From that day on, the surveillance doubled. The Mother Superior started locking all the doors, including the kitchen and pantry. I could only walk in the cloister, and my room, always accompanied. The third attempt was the most desperate, and, for that very reason, the one that went most wrong. It was a stormy night about 3 months after my arrival. Thunder shook the old walls, and the rain fell as if the sky were collapsing. I noticed the nuns were distracted, praying in the chapel, frightened by the storm. I took the opportunity to go to the kitchen, where I had seen a small window that opened to the back of the convent. It was too tight for a normal person to pass through, but I was so thin by then that I thought I could make it. I climbed onto a chair, opened the window, and tried to squeeze through. I managed to get half my body out, but then I got stuck. The more I struggled, the more I bruised my ribs. The rain hit my face, cold as ice. It was Sister Teresa, the oldest of the nuns, who found me. She called the others, screaming. It took the priest, who had stayed at the convent because of the storm, and all 3 nuns to pull me back inside. Besides the bruised ribs, I fractured a finger on my left hand in the fall. I was bedridden for a week, delirious with fever from the pneumonia I caught in all that rain. The Mother Superior was furious. "You are determined to kill yourself, it seems," she said with that icy stare. "We will have to take more severe measures." The more severe measures included locking me in my room at night, with only an old chamber pot under the bed for my needs. 3 attempts, 3 failures. Bruised, sick, and now locked away like an animal. This is the absolute lowest point. It's here, in the dark, that a person either gives up completely or finds a new way to fight. During the day, I could only walk in the cloister, always watched by one of the nuns. My meals were served in the room, and the medications which I continued to throw out when no one was looking came with the food. It was the lowest point of my life. The feeling of helplessness was so overwhelming that I began to wonder if it wouldn't be better to just let go, stop fighting, accept the end. I fell into a deep depression. I stopped eating, talking, almost breathing. I lay in bed all day, staring at the peeling ceiling, counting the cracks in the wall. I lost so much weight that my clothes, those old, threadbare ones the nuns had given me, hung on me like on a scarecrow. The Mother Superior seemed indifferent to my state. "It's just a phase," she would say when Sister Agnes expressed concern. "She's trying to get attention. It will pass." But Sister Agnes didn't give up on me, thank God. One Sunday afternoon, when everyone was at Mass, she secretly entered my room, carrying a steaming cup. "Mrs. Collins," she whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I made a special tea for you. My mother used to make it when I was sad. The tea was lemon balm with a little honey, nothing special in medicinal terms, but the gesture of kindness touched me so deeply that I began to cry. They were the first tears after weeks of apathy. "Why are you doing this, sister?" I asked between sobs. "Why do you care, my dears?" Never, ever underestimate the power of a single, small kindness. When you are at the bottom of the abyss, a warm cup of tea, a gentle word, it isn't just tea, it's hope. It's proof that you still exist, that someone, somewhere, still sees you. That small gesture from Sister Agnes, it saved me, in more ways than she will ever know. She held my wrinkled hand between hers, equally marked by time. "Because I see in your eyes that you are not crazy, as they say. I see intelligence, I see dignity, and I don't think what they are doing is right." It was the first time anyone in that place acknowledged the injustice of my situation. I had no idea that this quiet, obedient nun had so much perception. From that day on, Sister Agnes became my secret ally. She brought hidden books for me to read, told me news from the outside world that she heard on the old radio in the kitchen. Sometimes she even let me use the scissors to cut my nails, something the Mother Superior had forbidden, afraid I might use them as a weapon. Slowly, I began to climb out of the dark pit of depression. I started eating again, getting out of bed, showing interest in the small things around me, not out of acceptance, but as a strategy. If I wanted to escape, I needed to be strong and lucid, and above all, I needed to win the nuns' trust. It was around this time that I began my secret, nightly explorations. Sister Agnes, pitying my suffering, sometimes forgot to lock my door. I would wait for everyone to fall asleep and slip out, stepping on the parts of the floorboard that didn't creak. After months there, I knew every plank. I explored the corners of the convent I couldn't visit during the day, always alert for any noise. That's how I discovered the abandoned library, in a wing that had been closed off after part of the roof collapsed. The first time I went in there, my heart almost leaped out of my chest. The door creaked so loudly I was sure I'd wake the entire convent, but no one came. I used a candle I had swiped from the chapel to light the room. It was a large room, with floor-to-ceiling wooden shelves, covered in dusty books. In the corners, piles of books and papers that had been removed from the shelves when the leak started. The smell of mold was so strong I had to cover my nose with my nightgown sleeve. But to me, it was the smell of hope. I spent hours in there that first night, leafing through books at random, most in Latin or Old Spanish, which I could barely decipher. I was about to give up when a particularly worn volume caught my eye. It was a leather-bound notebook, similar to my grandmother Beatrice's, but larger and older. On the cover, in faded letters, Compendium Herbarum Medicinalium, Sister Angelica, 1891. In that moment, my heart just stopped. It was like my grandmother Beatrice was reaching across a century to take my hand. You see, knowledge never dies. It just waits, forgotten in a dusty library, just as I was forgotten in this convent. And right then, I knew that both of us, we were about to be rediscovered. I opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed and fragile, and there it was, in old but legible English, a complete treatise on the medicinal plants of the region, written by a nun named Angelica. My hands trembled. It was like finding water in the desert. The pages were filled with detailed drawings of plants, descriptions of their properties, preparation methods, dosages. Some plants I recognized from my grandmother's notebook. Others were completely new to me. Sister Angelica had extraordinary knowledge, not just of botany, but also of human anatomy and physiology, something rare for a woman of that era. She described with precision how each plant affected different body systems, possible side effects, contraindications. I took the notebook to my room, hidden inside my nightgown. During the day, I pretended to sleep, but I was actually studying every page, memorizing as much as I could. At night, I would return it to the library and pick up another interesting volume. Over the weeks, I built a mental catalog in my head of the medicinal plants Sister Angelica had documented. And the most incredible part, many of them still grew in the convent's abandoned gardens. During my permitted walks in the cloister, I began to identify these plants. Elderflower in the dampest corners, street John's wort in the sunny areas, mugwort near the west wall, lemon balm in the flower beds near the kitchen. The opportunity to put this knowledge into practice came when Sister Agnes began to complain of terrible joint pain. "It's age," she would say resignedly, massaging her gnarled fingers after washing the laundry. "The winter always makes it worse. Arthritis, clearly." The poor woman could barely hold her rosary to pray. It pained me to see her suffering like that, especially since she was the only one who treated me with humanity in that place. "Sister," I said one day when we were alone in the kitchen, "I know a remedy that might help with those pains." It was my grandmother's recipe. She was a midwife back in Boonville. She seemed interested, but hesitant. "I can't take anything without the Mother Superior's permission," she replied. "And she will never agree to give you access to plants that could be dangerous." I smiled to reassure her. "I don't need dangerous plants. Elderflower and street John's wort grow right here in the garden. They are harmless, but very effective for joint pain if prepared correctly." After some persuasion, she agreed to help me gather the plants, as long as it was discreet. One afternoon, when the Mother Superior had gone to the village, we went out to the garden with the excuse of picking vegetables for the soup. I collected some elderflower leaves and blossoms, a handful of street John's wort, and while I was at it, some nettle that grew near the abandoned chicken coop. Back in the kitchen, I asked for hot water and some olive oil. Sister Agnes provided everything, curious but apprehensive. Following Sister Angelica's recipe from memory, I made a concentrated infusion of the herbs. Then I mixed it with the olive oil to form a kind of ointment. The smell was strong, but not unpleasant. "Apply it to the painful joints before bed and cover with a wool cloth," I instructed. "It makes a warm compress that penetrates deep into the skin. In 3 days, you tell me if it's better." She agreed, hiding the makeshift jar in the pocket of her habit. 3 days later, Sister Agnes sought me out, her eyes shining. "Mrs. Collins, it's a miracle," she whispered, showing me her hands. "The pain is almost gone." I was able to ring the bell this morning without feeling that agony. Her enthusiasm was so genuine that I couldn't help but smile. It's not a miracle, sister. It's science. Plants have properties that modern medicine sometimes forgets. She looked at me with a new expression. It was no longer pity or caution, but respect. You really understand these things, don't you? You were a nurse before. Dr. Ryan mentioned it. From that day on, our alliance strengthened. Sister Agnes began to regularly bring me plants from the garden to prepare more ointment, not only for herself, but also for Sister Teresa, who suffered from similar problems. In return, she gave me more freedom, more information, small privileges, like an extra pillow or an occasional fresh piece of fruit. She never directly questioned the story of my supposed dementia, but I realized she no longer believed it. Over time, we expanded our operation. Sister Agnes found some old pots in the basement and placed them strategically around the convent. Some on the sunny inner sills of windows, others in discreet corners of the cloister, some even in her own room. We began to cultivate the most useful herbs that were harder to find in the wild garden. It was our little clandestine garden, our shared secret. She told the Mother Superior they were just ornamental plants to brighten the place. The big turning point came when the Mother Superior herself fell ill. For years, she had suffered from gastric ulcers and chronic insomnia, problems she treated with stoicism and prayers. But during that particularly harsh winter, her condition worsened dramatically. She spent sleepless nights, moaning in pain. During the day, she could barely fulfill her duties, pale and trembling. The village doctor came to see her, but only prescribed the same old medicines, which no longer had any effect. Sister Agnes, seeing her superior's suffering, made a bold decision. Without consulting me first, she told the Mother Superior about my special skill with medicinal plants and how I had helped her and Sister Teresa. When I found out, I was terrified. She'll think I'm trying to poison her, I said. She'll lock me up for good. But Sister Agnes shook her head. She's desperate, Mrs. Collins. The pain is unbearable. In this state, she would accept help even from the devil. And so it was. The Mother Superior summoned me to her room, something that had never happened before. She was lying in the narrow bed, her face contorted in pain, more human than I had ever seen her. Sister Agnes tells me, "You have knowledge of natural medicine," she said, her voice weak, but still authoritative. "If it's true, I ask you to help me, out of Christian charity." I swallowed the acidic comment that almost escaped about how she hadn't shown much Christian charity towards me. Instead, I nodded. "I will need access to certain plants in the kitchen," I replied. "And perhaps some items from the pantry?" To my surprise, she agreed to everything. Pain can bend even the most rigid pride. I began preparing the treatment immediately. In Sister Angelica's manuscripts, I had found a specific recipe for gastric ulcers, a combination of aloe vera, chamomile, and a lesser-known plant called cabruva, which luckily still grew in a remote corner of the garden. For insomnia, a mixture of valerian, lemon balm, and lavender, which Sister Agnes cultivated in her clandestine pots. I worked in the kitchen late into the night, preparing 2 different mixtures. One was a thick aloe vera gel, combined with chamomile and cabruva extract, to be taken 3 times a day before meals. The other, a strong tea of valerian, lemon balm, and lavender, to be drunk 1 hour before bed. I took the remedies to the Mother Superior's room and explained in detail how to use them. She accepted them with a mixture of skepticism and desperate hope. The next morning, when Sister Agnes brought me my breakfast, her eyes told the story before her mouth even did. "The mother slept through the entire night," she whispered excitedly, "for the first time in weeks. And she said the pain in her stomach has decreased considerably." I felt a wave of satisfaction. It wasn't just about helping someone in suffering, although that was also gratifying. It was about proving my worth, about demonstrating that I was far from the senile old woman Ryan had described. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued to treat the Mother Superior. Her condition improved steadily and impressively. The color returned to her cheeks, her appetite improved, her nights of sleep became regular. She still wasn't exactly warm towards me, but there was a new note of respect in her voice when she addressed me. The dynamic has completely shifted. The demented prisoner is now the most indispensable person in the convent. Margaret has just turned her cell into a position of power. And more importantly, the restrictions began to loosen. I could circulate more freely around the convent, join the meals in the refectory, even visit parts of the garden without an escort. A month after starting the treatment, the Mother Superior called me for a serious conversation. She was sitting at her desk, stronger and more composed than I had seen her in a long time. "Mrs. Collins," she began, "I must admit that your natural remedies have produced remarkable results. I am indebted to you." I made a dismissive gesture with my hand, but she continued, "This makes me question other things I was told about you." My heart sped up. Was she finally seeing the truth? "What things, Mother?" I asked cautiously. She adjusted her veil. "Uncomfortable. Dr. Ryan described you as someone mentally unstable, dangerous to yourself, incapable of clear reasoning." I took a deep breath. This was my chance. "Mother," I replied, keeping my voice firm and calm. "I am a retired obstetric nurse. I worked for over 40 years at St. Luke's Hospital in Kansas City. I helped bring over 2,000 babies into the world. I am in full control of my mental faculties. What my nephew did was forcibly sedate me and have me committed here illegally to steal my assets." I expected to see shock on her face, perhaps indignation. Instead, I only saw a shadow of doubt pass through her eyes, quickly replaced by that mask of authority. "Those are very serious accusations, Mrs. Collins. Dr. Ryan is a respected physician, specializing in geriatrics. Why would he do such a thing?" It was clear she wasn't ready to accept the whole truth. The money Ryan had donated to the convent weighed more than my words, but I had planted the seed of doubt, and that was something. "Mother," I changed tactics slightly. "I am not asking you to believe me immediately. I only ask for a chance to prove my worth and sanity. Let me use my knowledge to help. I've noticed that many nuns in old convents were versed in natural medicine, as Sister Angelica's manuscripts show. I could organize this information, cultivate a proper medicinal garden, perhaps even prepare remedies that the convent could offer to the villagers." The mention of the manuscripts made her eyebrows rise. "How do you know about those manuscripts?" she asked suspiciously. Too late, I realized my mistake. I had revealed my nightly explorations, but I decided to come clean, or at least partially. During my walks in the cloister, I noticed the abandoned wing. The door was ajar one day, and curiosity got the better of me. I found the library and Sister Angelica's manuscripts. I apologize for not mentioning it sooner. To my surprise, instead of being furious, she seemed intrigued. "Those manuscripts have been lost for years. Since the roof collapsed, no one could find them. We thought they had been destroyed by water." Her gaze turned contemplative. "Can you really understand what's written in them? Some parts are in Latin, others in archaic English." I nodded. My husband was a university professor. I learned a little Latin from him. And as for the Old English, it's not so different, especially when it comes to botanical terms. That conversation marked the beginning of a new phase in my life at the convent. The Mother Superior didn't free me, nor did she entirely believe my version of events, but she granted me permission to work formally with the medicinal plants. She designated a piece of the garden for me to cultivate the necessary herbs, no longer in hidden pots, but in proper beds. She gave me supervised access to the library to study the manuscripts, and most importantly, she allowed me to use the kitchen to prepare natural remedies. That's when I started to develop my own extraction method. Sister Angelica's manuscripts described 19th century techniques that required equipment we didn't have. The convent kitchen was basic. Old pots, a few dull knives, wooden utensils worn down by time. But I had my modern nursing knowledge, an understanding of chemistry principles, and above all, a desperate need to prove myself useful to gain more freedom. I adapted modern extraction techniques to work with what we had. I used a double boiler for extractions that needed controlled temperature. I improvised a filtration system with clean cotton cloths layered in different thicknesses. For macerations, I used glass canning jars I found in the basement. I created a rudimentary distillation method using pots, ice, and tubes improvised from hollow bamboo from the garden. It wasn't sophisticated, but it worked surprisingly well. The results began to appear quickly. I treated Sister Teresa's chronic arthritis with a nettle and ginger ointment that significantly reduced her pain. I cured a persistent ear infection in the cook, who came once a week with propolis and garlic drops. I made a cough syrup with eucalyptus and honey for the dry cough that plagued Sister Agnes every morning. Each success gave me more credibility, more freedom, more respect. The Mother Superior, completely recovered thanks to my treatment, began to talk about my healing gifts with the priest during his visits. The priest, in turn, mentioned it to the residents of the nearby village. Soon, people started showing up at the convent gate, asking for the nun who is not a nun's remedies. At first, the Mother Superior hesitated to let them in, fearful of problems with Ryan or the diocese, but the need was great. The village was almost 2 hours from the nearest city with a hospital, and many didn't have money for doctors or pharmaceutical drugs. I started receiving the sick in the parlor, that room near the entrance where nuns traditionally receive visitors. It wasn't the ideal environment, but I adapted the space as best I could. I listened carefully to their symptoms, examined when possible, and prepared specific remedies for each case. I used both the knowledge from Sister Angelica's manuscripts and my own medical training. The combination was powerful. Ancient wisdom allied with a modern understanding of anatomy, physiology, and pathology. The most common cases were respiratory problems, common in that damp, cold region, joint pain, digestive issues, infected wounds, and skin diseases. For each, I developed specific treatments, always carefully documenting the ingredients, proportions, and results. I created my own recipe notebook, in the likeness of my grandmother Beatrice's and Sister Angelica's, continuing a tradition of women healers that spanned centuries. It was then that I realized something crucial. Maybe I couldn't escape that convent by force, but I could win my freedom in another way. If my reputation as a healer grew enough, if influential people from the village or the city learned of my existence, Ryan wouldn't be able to maintain the farce of my mental incapacity. Someone, at some point, would question his story, and then I would have a chance to prove the truth. With this in mind, I dedicated myself even more to my work. I woke up before dawn to harvest certain plants that needed to be picked with the dew still on them. I slept late, studying the ancient manuscripts by candlelight. I tested new combinations of herbs, refined extraction methods, created more effective treatments. I became obsessed, not just with healing itself, but with what it represented. My path back to freedom. The Mother Superior, seeing my dedication and the tangible results, loosened the restrictions even more. I was no longer treated as a prisoner, but as a kind of collaborator. I had my own set of keys to certain areas of the convent. I could walk alone in the gardens, receive people in the parlor without supervision. I still couldn't leave the convent walls, of course, nor did I have access to a telephone or other means of communication with the outside world. But it was enormous progress compared to the first few months. One particular case marked a decisive turning point. It was a particularly cold February morning when a desperate man appeared at the convent gate. He was carrying a boy of about 8 years old in his arms, pale, with bluish lips, struggling to breathe. "My son is dying," he pleaded. "He's had asthma since he was little, but I've never seen an attack this bad. The doctor in town is traveling, and we can't get to the hospital in Kansas City in time." Sister Agnes came to get me immediately. The boy was in the midst of a severe asthma attack with bronchospasm that threatened to suffocate him. In a hospital, they would have used injectable bronchodilators, oxygen, perhaps even intubation. Here, I had only my herbs and knowledge. "Bring him to the kitchen," I ordered, momentarily forgetting I had no authority in that place. But no one questioned. The urgency was evident. In the kitchen, I began to work frantically. I grabbed the stock of lobelia tincture I had prepared weeks earlier, a plant with effects similar to modern bronchodilators, but which must be used with extreme care due to its toxicity in the wrong doses. I mixed it with wormseed extract and pure honey. I diluted it slightly and gave a few drops to the child. While waiting for it to take effect, I prepared an inhalation of eucalyptus, mint, and camphor. I improvised a tent with sheets over the boy's head as he breathed in the medicinal steam. The first 15 minutes were the longest of my life. The father cried silently in a corner. The Mother Superior prayed on her knees. The other nuns watched anxiously. I constantly monitored the boy's vital signs, ready to change strategy at the slightest sign of worsening. But then his lips began to lose that bluish tint. His breathing, still difficult, became less noisy. His nostrils stopped flaring so much in the fight for air. I administered a few more drops of the mixture. I adjusted the steam tent. After an hour, the boy was breathing almost normally, exhausted but out of danger. She's not just a healer, she's a lifesaver. This single act proves her knowledge is real and powerful. News of this miracle is about to spread far beyond the convent walls, and it's going to change everything. It's a miracle, the father whispered, hugging his son, who was now sleeping peacefully. The Mother Superior, who had watched the whole thing, looked at me in a new way, no longer with suspicion or mere tolerance, but with something close to reverence. "How did you know what to do?" she asked after the man left, promising to return with some form of payment. I briefly explained the scientific basis of the treatment, how lobelia acts on pulmonary receptors, how the steam with essential oils helps dilate the airways. "This is not the knowledge of someone with dementia," she commented, almost to herself. "You have a sharper mind than many young people." It was the first time she explicitly questioned Ryan's diagnosis. I felt a surge of hope. "Mother," I ventured, "perhaps it's time to consider the possibility that my nephew was not entirely honest about my condition." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will write to the diocese," she said finally. "Requesting an independent evaluation of your situation is the correct procedure." That night, lying in my bed, which no longer seemed so uncomfortable after so many months, I reflected on my journey so far. I had transformed my prison into a laboratory. I had used ancestral and modern knowledge to create something new, something that was helping real people. I had earned respect where before there was only suspicion and contempt. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was a path to it. And for the first time since I woke up in that cold stone room, I felt something like peace. If you are impressed by the strength of an 82-year-old woman who turned her prison into a laboratory, tap the screen twice right now. Let's see. How many hearts are capable of recognizing that wisdom has no age to manifest? Because, my friends, old age is not the end of the road. Sometimes it's precisely when we find the most important path in life. And it's not always the path we expected, but it's the one God placed in front of us to show what we are capable of. In the following weeks, my pharmacy expanded considerably. The Mother Superior, now convinced of the value of my work, assigned an entire room near the kitchen for me to use as a laboratory. It was a large room, with big windows that let in plenty of natural light, essential for working with plants. With the help of Sister Agnes and even Sister Teresa, who could move much better thanks to my treatments, I organized the space by function. An area for drying plants, another for preparation and processing, a third for storing the finished remedies. My fame spread beyond the nearby village. People began to come from further and further away, some traveling an entire day to consult the healer of the convent of St. Clare. The Mother Superior, pragmatic as she was, saw the potential not only to help people in need, but also to generate some income for the convent, which was struggling to survive. She established a system of voluntary donations. Those who could pay left what they could. Those who couldn't received the treatment for free. But I knew this was just the beginning. The real test was yet to come. If the mother really requested an independent evaluation of my mental state, Ryan would be confronted with his lies. And then maybe I could finally get my life back, my dignity, my freedom. The hope, which had been just a small, flickering flame in the first few months, now burned strong and steady in my chest. It was on a September morning, with the first hint of autumn in the air, that I had my first real contact with the outside world after almost 8 months trapped in that convent. Father Michael, a short, white-haired man with kind eyes, made bi-weekly visits to bring supplies and celebrate Mass. Normally, I only saw him from a distance during the service, but on that day, the Mother Superior specifically called me to help receive the deliveries. "Mrs. Collins," she said, in a tone that now carried genuine respect, "the priest brought some ingredients you requested for your remedies. Jars for storage, too. I thought it best you check yourself if everything is correct." I could barely hide my surprise. It was the first time I was allowed to participate in any interaction with an outsider. I straightened the worn apron I wore over my simple dress. They no longer dressed me as an inmate, but they didn't give me the nun's habit either. I ran a hand through my gray hair and followed the mother to the convent entrance. The priest was unloading boxes from an old, battered Ford E-Series van parked in the entrance courtyard. When he saw me, he smiled broadly. "Ah, so this is the famous Mrs. Collins. We finally meet formally." He extended a calloused hand, which I shook with an emotion I could barely control. It was the first physical contact with someone from the outside world in so long. "Your fame is spreading, you know. In the village, all they talk about are the miracles of the nun, who is not a nun." The mother cleared her throat, slightly uncomfortable. "They are not miracles, Father, but medicinal knowledge applied with competence." As we checked the boxes, the priest chatted about the news from the village, from the nearest city, even from Kansas City. To him, it was trivial conversation. To me, they were precious drops of information from the world that had been stolen from me. I absorbed every word, every mention of dates, events, changes. At one point, when the mother stepped away to answer a call from Sister Teresa, the priest lowered his voice. "You seem very well for someone they say suffers from advanced dementia." There was a shrewd glint in his kind eyes. My heart leaped. "I don't have any dementia, Father," I whispered back. "I was brought here by force, sedated by my nephew who stole my assets." I didn't have time to explain more, as the mother returned, but I saw an expression on the priest's face that mixed shock and curiosity. For the rest of his visit, he cast thoughtful glances my way. As he was leaving, he asked to bless me. While making the sign of the cross over my bowed head, he murmured, "Next Sunday, I'll return with more supplies and a lawyer friend who would like to know about your work." I barely slept that night, so great was the anticipation. Finally, someone from the outside could hear my story. But fate has its own plans, which rarely coincide with ours. The morning after the priest's visit, even before breakfast, we heard desperate banging on the gate. The mother, who would normally be the only one to answer, was bedridden with a bad flu. Sister Agnes came running to get me. "Mrs. Collins, there's a family outside. Their son is very sick. It looks like the same boy with asthma you treated months ago." I didn't wait for a second order. I grabbed my shawl and ran to the gate. There they were, the father, the mother, and the boy, who must have been about 8. He was in a terrible state, worse than the first time. Lips almost purple, breathing shallow and noisy, his body limp in his father's arms. "He was fine," the mother explained through tears. "But yesterday he came home from school with a fever, and during the night his breathing started to get worse. We tried the syrup you gave us last time, but it didn't help." I quickly examined the child. It wasn't just an asthma attack. There was a respiratory infection complicating the situation. I would need a different approach. "Bring him to my laboratory," I ordered, forgetting again that I had no authority there. But no one questioned. We carried the boy, Gabriel was his name, and placed him on the clean work table I had prepared precisely for emergencies. I started working immediately while giving instructions to Sister Agnes and the boy's mother. "Boil water with these herbs, quickly. And you, sir, hold him in this position with his head slightly elevated." The next 30 minutes were intense and precise work. I prepared a more potent version of the anti-asthma syrup, now combining it with a propolis infusion and an echinacea tincture I had prepared weeks earlier for infection cases. It was a treatment I had never tested before, combining recipes from Sister Angelica's manuscripts with modern knowledge of immunology I had learned as a nurse. The wrong dosage could be dangerous, especially for an already weakened child. I measured each drop with the precision of a pharmacist, praying silently not to make a mistake. I administered the syrup carefully, a few drops at a time. Then, I prepared an inhalation with specific essential oils to open the bronchial tubes and fight the infection. We improvised a tent over the boy's head with a sheet, and he breathed in the medicinal steam deeply. Slowly, his breathing improved, the color returning to his lips. After an hour, he could already sit up and drink water on his own. After 2, he smiled weakly and asked for food, an infallible sign of improvement in any child. The parents cried with relief, the mother kissing my wrinkled hands, the father repeating, "God bless you," like a mantra. I prepared more of the syrup for them to take home, along with detailed instructions on how and when to administer it. If the fever returns or his breathing worsens again, bring him back immediately, I instructed, and avoid very cold or very damp air for the next few days. They nodded, absorbing every word as sacred truth. As they were leaving, the mother turned to me. "Mrs. Collins, you saved our son twice. We have no way to pay you, but we will tell everyone about the angel we found here." I smiled, touched by their sincere gratitude. But then, on an impulse I couldn't explain, I took a small packet of medicinal herbs I had separated for them and slipped a piece of paper, folded several times. Inside it, it was a simple note. "I am not a nun, nor mentally ill. I am trapped here against my will by my nephew, Dr. Ryan, who stole my assets. Please, get legal help. Margaret Grant Collins, retired nurse, Kansas City." A desperate gamble. Margaret just placed her entire future in the hands of a stranger. Now, all she can do is wait and hope that this tiny message in a bottle finds its way to shore. Keep listening to see if her plea is answered. That was a gamble. A terrible gamble. If they had given that note to the Mother Superior, I would have lost everything. My lab, the trust I'd built, everything. But when I looked into that mother's grateful eyes, I knew I had to trust her. Sometimes your greatest leap of faith isn't in God, it's in a perfect stranger. And I bet my entire life on that little slip of paper. It was a huge risk. If the mother or the other nuns found the note first, I would lose all the trust and freedom I had gained. But something told me that this simple, grateful family was my best chance. And I was right, although the results took longer than I expected to appear. In the following weeks, my reputation grew exponentially. First, more families came from the nearby village, then from neighboring villages, then people from the nearest big city. Some cases were simple: colds, minor infections, digestive problems. Others were more complex: poorly controlled diabetes, severe hypertension, even a case of hepatitis that I treated with a combination of boldo, milk thistle, and other herbs specific to the liver. I didn't promise miraculous cures, but I offered relief, support for conventional treatment when it existed, or alternatives when it wasn't available or accessible. The flow of people became so large that the Mother Superior had to establish visiting hours 3 mornings a week, with numbers distributed at the entrance. To my surprise, she didn't try to restrict these interactions or monitor them closely. On the contrary, she seemed proud of the attention the convent was receiving, of the good we were doing for the community. The money from voluntary donations also helped keep the place running, of course. The leaking roof was fixed. The pantry was fuller. They even bought new blankets for the winter. During this period, the nuns began to treat me differently, no longer as a prisoner nor as a forced guest, but almost as one of them. They invited me to meals, to the prayers which I attended or not, depending on my mood, included me in the day-to-day decisions. Sister Agnes became a true friend, spending hours with me in the laboratory, learning about the plants and their properties. Sister Teresa, once distant and suspicious, now sought me out to talk about her pains, her fears, her memories of youth. Even the Mother Superior, always so rigid and formal, occasionally allowed herself moments of relaxation in my presence, revealing a dry sense of humor that surprised me. I began to feel something unexpected, a kind of peace, of belonging. It wasn't happiness, not entirely. The injustice of what Ryan had done still burned in my chest. The longing for my home, my belongings, my independence still hurt. But I had found purpose in that unlikely place, in that work that combined the ancestral traditions of my grandmother Beatrice and Sister Angelica with my modern knowledge. One day, as autumn was giving way to winter again, marking almost a year since my forced arrival at the convent, we received an unusual visitor, a middle-aged man, neatly trimmed gray beard, thin-framed glasses, formal but discreet attire. He didn't look sick or desperate, like most who sought us out. He introduced himself to the Mother Superior as Professor Nathan Douglas, a researcher from the University of Missouri's pharmacy department, specializing in phytotherapy. He had heard about the extraordinary treatments offered at the convent and had come to investigate personally. The mother, always cautious with strangers, unless they brought generous donations, hesitated initially, but the professor had impeccable credentials and a letter of introduction from the diocese. Apparently, the bishop was also curious about the stories circulating. I was called to meet him in the parlor, that austere room where we received visitors. "Mrs. Collins," he said, after the formal introductions, "I am impressed by the reports I've been hearing. People talking about remarkable cures, of plant combinations that conventional medicine disregards. I would like to understand your work better, if possible." There was a genuine respect in his voice that touched me. It wasn't the condescending tone many doctors used when talking about alternative medicine, nor the blind admiration of those seeking miracles. It was the scientific interest of a colleague. "Professor," I replied, "I don't do anything extraordinary. I just combine traditional knowledge documented in ancient manuscripts I found right here in the convent, with basic principles of pharmacology and physiology I learned as a nurse. They aren't miraculous cures. They are treatments based on natural, active ingredients, many of which are already scientifically proven, others not yet adequately studied." He smiled, clearly intrigued. "It is exactly this rational approach that interests me. You mentioned manuscripts?" For the next 2 hours, we talked as equals. I showed him some of Sister Angelica's manuscripts, not all of them, as some had been entrusted to me under special conditions by the mother. I explained my improvised extraction methods, discussed specific cases, and the results obtained. He asked insightful questions, took notes in a little black notebook, occasionally photographed pages or plants with a small digital camera, with permission from the mother, who supervised everything discreetly. "Mrs. Collins," he said at the end, "what you have developed here is remarkable, not just for the knowledge itself, but for the method. You've managed to build a bridge between tradition and science, between ancestral wisdom and modern understanding. I would like to collect samples of some of your preparations for analysis in our laboratory, if possible, and perhaps return for more complete documentation." The Mother Superior, who had been silent until then, intervened. "That would be acceptable, Professor, as long as the convent's name is duly credited in any resulting publication." Always pragmatic, that mother. The professor agreed, assuring that all ethical standards would be followed. Before leaving, he carefully collected samples of 5 of my most successful preparations, including the anti-asthma syrup and the joint pain ointment. "You are a scientist, Mrs. Collins, even without the formal title," he commented on his way out. "What you do here is applied research of the highest quality." That recognition, coming from a respected academic, meant more to me than he could possibly imagine. It was validation not only of my current work, but of a whole life dedicated to knowledge, to healing, to caring for others. 3 weeks later, Professor Nathan returned, this time accompanied by a young assistant who carried portable lab equipment. He also brought the preliminary results of the analyses. "Extraordinary" was the first word he said when he saw me. "We found active components in ideal concentrations, synergistic combinations that enhance the effects, and even compounds we hadn't yet identified in conventional herbal preparations." The assistant, a shy girl with glasses named Anna, set up a small temporary lab in the corner of my office. For 2 days, they tested my preparations right there, analyzing concentrations, stability, degradation time. The professor explained each test, each result, treating me as a colleague, not a subject of study. "You should be teaching at the university," he commented at one point. "Our students would learn more from you in a week than from us in a semester." On the second day, when we were alone for a moment, the assistant had gone to get more equipment from the car. The professor lowered his voice. "Mrs. Collins, something puzzles me. You obviously possess full mental faculties and vast technical knowledge. How did you end up in an isolated convent like this? It doesn't seem like the natural environment for someone with your training and skills." It was the opening I had been waiting for so long. Finally, someone from the outside world who sees her not as a patient, but as a scientific colleague. This is the powerful ally she's been waiting for. The fight is no longer just Margaret against the world. Quickly, in a low but firm voice, I told him my true story. The treacherous nephew, the forced sedation, the false diagnosis of dementia, the theft of my assets. His eyes widened as I spoke. "This is criminal," he murmured when I finished. "Elder abuse, document forgery, embezzlement, false imprisonment. You need legal help, urgently." I nodded, feeling a wave of hope. I tried to send a request for help with a family I treated months ago, but I never knew if it got anywhere. He frowned thoughtfully. I will check on that personally. I have contacts in the legal field, trustworthy people. Just give me a little time. The professor's visit marked the beginning of a new phase in my stay at the convent. The Mother Superior, impressed by the academic interest in my work, granted me even more freedom and resources. I got a larger space for the laboratory, permission to expand the medicinal plant garden, even a small budget to buy books and materials. It wasn't exactly freedom, but it was getting closer and closer to an acceptable situation. People continued to come, now in even greater numbers, thanks to the indirect validation from the academic world. The nun who is not a nun, who heals with plants, had become an almost mythical figure in the region. Some came from hundreds of miles away after hearing stories of miraculous cures, which I always made a point to explain as natural processes, not supernatural ones. The mother even established a lodging system for those who came from far away. Simple accommodations in a wing of the convent that was previously abandoned, now renovated with the donation money. I was, ironically, living a fuller and more significant life than in my retirement years in Kansas City. There, I was just another elderly woman, invisible to society. Here, I was valued, respected, needed. I had created something unique, something important. In moments of deep honesty with myself, I recognized that if it weren't for Ryan's betrayal, I might never have discovered this path. The initial injustice had opened an unexpected door, but fate, that old trickster, had one more card up its sleeve. One November morning, as the first cold winds of winter were already blowing, the Mother Superior called me to her office. Her face was grave, the wrinkles around her mouth more pronounced than ever. "Mrs. Collins," she began, her voice tense, "I received a disturbing correspondence from the diocese. Apparently, a complaint has been filed against the convent. We are being accused of practicing medicine illegally, quackery, even charlatanism." I felt the blood freeze in my veins. Who would make such a complaint? We have helped so many people. The mother sighed heavily. The letter doesn't specify the origin of the complaint, but it mentions it came from a concerned medical professional worried about public health. I didn't need much effort to guess who this concerned professional was. Ryan. Somehow, he had found out about my work at the convent. "What does this mean for us?" I asked, already dreading the answer. The mother clasped her hands on the desk. "The bishop has ordered an investigation. In the meantime, I must suspend all healing activities at the convent, and furthermore..." She hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "There is a possibility that the convent will be closed permanently. We are already low on resources, with few nuns. This could be the excuse the diocese needs to transfer us and sell the property." The news hit me like a punch. It wasn't just my work that was threatened. It was the entire convent, the home of these few elderly nuns, the refuge that, despite everything, had become important to me too. "There must be something we can do," I argued. Professor Nathan could testify to the scientific validity of the treatments. "We have hundreds of people who can attest to the benefits received." The mother nodded slightly. "I have already contacted the professor, and Father Michael is interceding with the bishop. But the process will be long, and the outcome uncertain." She paused, her gaze distant. In the meantime, I received another document, even more disturbing. She slid a paper across the desk. It was an official letter with a medical letterhead. As I read, I felt my stomach sink. It was a formal request for my immediate transfer from the convent to a psychiatric clinic in Kansas City, signed by none other than Dr. Ryan, who identified himself as my legal guardian. The document alleged severe deterioration of my mental state and potentially dangerous behavior, specifically citing my involvement in quackery practices. "He can't do this," I murmured, my voice trembling with indignation. "Not after everything we've built here." The mother then surprised me, placing her wrinkled hand on mine. "Mrs. Collins, over the past few months, I have observed you closely. I've seen your compassion, your intelligence, your healing ability. I've also seen your indisputable sanity. Whatever the truth about the beginning of your stay here, I am sure you do not belong in a psychiatric institution." Did you hear that? That was the sound of the truth, finally breaking through. It took almost a year. A year of healing, a year of proving, a year of fighting. But at last, she saw me. She saw the truth. That was the moment I knew I wasn't fighting alone anymore. And when you're not alone, my dears, you can face anything. It was the first time she explicitly questioned Ryan's version of my mental condition. I do not intend to comply with this transfer order, at least not until we can resolve this situation properly. That declaration of support, coming from the rigid and traditionalist Mother Superior, moved me deeply. I, who had arrived there as a prisoner, had earned not only respect but an alliance. The nuns, who were initially innocent instruments in my imprisonment, were now on my side against my own nephew. Life has these ironies that no novelist would dare invent. 2 days later, Professor Nathan showed up at the convent, agitated and with important news. He had discovered something that explained Ryan's sudden intervention. "Mrs. Collins, your nephew is becoming a sort of celebrity in the field of geriatrics. He gives lectures all over the country about humanized care for the elderly, dignity in old age, that sort of thing. He's even written a book that's selling quite well." He placed a medical journal in front of me, open to a specific page. It was an interview with Ryan, smiling pompously in a photo alongside smiling seniors in a well-kept garden. I read the article with a mixture of shock and nausea. Ryan spoke eloquently about respecting the elderly, preserving autonomy, person-centered care, not disease-centered. There was a specific passage that made me want to scream with rage. My own aunt was my inspiration, a strong, independent woman who unfortunately developed dementia. Seeing her suffer made me realize how our system fails the elderly. That's why I dedicated my life to changing that. The hypocrisy was so absurd it bordered on surreal. The man who had forcibly sedated me, locked me in an isolated convent, stolen everything I owned, was now presenting himself as a defender of elderly's rights. He was using the lie about my condition to build a lucrative career, selling an image of compassion while practicing the opposite. It was revolting, obscene. "Now I understand why he's so desperate to transfer me to a psychiatric clinic," I said, after regaining some composure. "If I appear in public, lucid, and telling the truth about what he did, his entire career will go down the drain." The professor nodded gravely. "Exactly. And from what I've discovered, his career is going very well. Expensive consultations, well-paid lectures, contracts with luxury nursing home chains. He's getting rich off this humanized specialist image." There was more. The professor had managed to locate my condo in Kansas City, or rather, the building where it was, as the condo itself had been sold shortly after my disappearance. "Your nephew sold it for a price well below market value, apparently in a hurry to close the deal," he explained. "He also emptied your bank accounts, sold your investments, all legally, since he had your power of attorney and the interdiction documents." It was like listening to the report of a funeral, the funeral of my previous life, my independence, everything I had built over decades. But anger surpassed sadness. "I'm not going to let him get away with it," I declared, slamming my hand on the table with surprising force for my age. "Somehow, I will get my life back and make him pay for this betrayal." The professor smiled slightly. "That's why I brought someone else with me today." He gestured, and the door opened. A middle-aged woman entered, short gray hair, a well-cut suit, a leather briefcase under her arm. "Mrs. Collins, this is Miss Elizabeth Reed, a lawyer specializing in elder rights and financial abuse crimes." And then he took a folded paper from his pocket. "Is this your note? The one you sent with the family of the boy with asthma." It took a while, but it reached the right hands. At that moment, between the shock of discovering Ryan's new career and the hope brought by the professor and the lawyer, I had an epiphany. I looked at the nuns gathered in the room, the Mother Superior with her unwavering dignity, Sister Agnes with her sincere kindness, Sister Teresa with her resilient fragility. They had been innocent instruments in my imprisonment, but they had also become unexpected allies in my journey of healing others and myself. "You know," I said to the professor, "in the beginning, I blamed these nuns as much as Ryan. I thought they were conscious accomplices, but now I understand they were just as deceived as I was. Ryan used their financial desperation, their credulity, their obedience to medical authority." The Mother Superior lowered her gaze, a slight blush of shame coloring her pale cheeks. And even after they began to suspect something was wrong, they were trapped by the money they had accepted, by the fear of the consequences. And do you think I was right to forgive the nuns, who were initially complicit with my nephew? They claimed not to know the truth, and they really did help me later. But did they deserve my compassion? What would you have done in my place? Because forgiving isn't always easy, especially when it involves people who contributed, even without ill intention, to our suffering. But I learned at that advanced age that resentment is a poison we drink, hoping the other person will die. And I had already swallowed enough poison in my life. The lawyer, Elizabeth, proved to be as efficient as she looked. In that very first meeting, she presented a clear plan of action. First, legally contest the interdiction based on current medical reports that would prove my full mental capacity. Second, open a criminal case against Ryan for various crimes: false imprisonment, embezzlement, document forgery, elder abuse. Third, file a civil suit to recover at least part of the assets that had been stolen from me. It won't be easy or fast, she warned, with the frankness that characterizes good lawyers. Your nephew has resources now. He can hire a good defense. He also has status in the medical community, which gives him credibility. But we have strong evidence, respectable witnesses, and above all, we have you, whose lucidity is unquestionable to anyone who talks to you for 5 minutes. We agreed that I would remain at the convent during the initial process. It was safer than trying to move me to another place where Ryan could easily find me. The Mother Superior, visibly relieved to have professional help, offered her full support. This convent may not be much, but it is a safe refuge while you seek justice, she declared with a dignity that moved me. The other nuns nodded in agreement. In the following days, a series of professionals visited the convent discreetly. A geriatrician, recommended by the lawyer, to examine me and attest to my sanity, a psychologist for a complete cognitive evaluation, a forensic accountant to help trace the money embezzled by Ryan. It was strange, after so much time isolated, to suddenly be surrounded by new people, activity, concrete hope. Professor Nathan, meanwhile, accelerated the analysis of my medicinal preparations. If we can publish a scientific paper with your name as the lead researcher, it will further strengthen your public image as a lucid and productive person, he explained. It was a smart strategy. Create a positive public presence to counter the demented aunt narrative built by Ryan. While this work advanced behind the scenes, I maintained my activities at the convent, albeit with a lower profile. We no longer received outside visitors for treatments, following the diocese's order, but I continued to care for the nuns and meticulously document all my work with medicinal plants. Every page written, every formula refined, was further proof of my sanity and capability. It was during this period of apparent calm that I received the most shocking news yet. The lawyer, Elizabeth, appeared at the convent on a rainy afternoon, her face tense with someone bringing grave information. "Mrs. Collins," she said after the greetings, "we discovered something disturbing about your nephew. Besides the crimes against you, he seems to have done the same to other elderly people." My heart raced. "What do you mean, other victims?" Elizabeth opened a folder and began to show me documents, reports, death certificates, interview transcripts. "We have identified at least 3 other cases similar to yours. Elderly people with significant assets, without direct heirs, who were declared incapable by Dr. Ryan, committed to isolated institutions, and who died in questionable circumstances shortly after. In all cases, he ended up managing their assets, directly or indirectly. This was no longer about a greedy nephew. This was a monster." When I heard those words, my blood ran cold. Ryan hadn't just robbed me. He was a predator, hunting people just like me. And he had succeeded, with the others. The room seemed to spin around me. Ryan wasn't just an ungrateful nephew who gave in to temptation for my assets. He was a systematic predator, a calculating criminal who had made this his method. And the other victims hadn't had my luck, my resilience, my stubborn will to survive. "How many died?" I asked, my voice almost failing. Elizabeth hesitated. 3 confirmed so far, and we suspect 2 more cases. At that moment, I understood that I wasn't just fighting for myself, for personal justice or the recovery of assets. I was fighting to stop a cycle of predation, to prevent other helpless people from falling into Ryan's hands. The anger I felt was different. No longer hot and impulsive, but cold and determined. This man needed to be stopped, and I would do whatever it took to make that happen. "There's one more thing," Elizabeth added hesitantly. "We managed to intercept a communication between your nephew and a psychiatric clinic in Kansas City. He is planning to come personally to pick you up with a medical team and an ambulance. Apparently, he got a court order based on the interdiction documents." I felt a chill. "When?" "In 3 days," she replied. "But don't worry, we are already prepared to contest this. The judge who issued the order didn't have all the information. We are filing for an emergency measure right now." 3 days. After almost a year in that convent, I could be ripped from there in just 3 days. Not to freedom, but to an even worse prison. A psychiatric clinic where Ryan would have direct control, where he could keep me constantly sedated, where no one would question if I suddenly turned up dead. The dread I felt was real and visceral, but I was no longer the disoriented and desperate woman who had woken up in a cold stone room so many months ago. I was a survivor, a fighter, someone who had turned her prison into a laboratory, her suffering into healing for others. I looked at the lawyer, at the Mother Superior who was watching the conversation in tense silence, at the other nuns gathered in the room. "They won't take me," I declared, with a certainty that surprised even me. "Not this time. Ryan may have doctors, ambulances, and court orders, but I have the truth. I have allies, and above all, I have the experience of a lifetime facing obstacles. If he thinks he's going to drag me to a clinic to silence me for good, he is sorely mistaken." The determination in my voice seemed to infect everyone. Elizabeth nodded vigorously. "Exactly, Mrs. Collins. We will not let that happen. We are already working on several fronts to ensure your safety." The Mother Superior, in a gesture I would never have expected from her months ago, placed her hand on my shoulder. "And we won't allow it either. This convent may have high walls, but it will not be a prison for you. It will be a fortress." For the next 3 days, the convent transformed into a center of frantic activity. The lawyer filed emergency petitions in different courts. Professor Nathan rushed the preliminary publication of the results on my medicinal preparations, ensuring my name appeared as the lead researcher. Father Michael mobilized the local community, which already knew and respected me for the treatments I had offered. Even the bishop, initially skeptical and worried about the accusations against the convent, was persuaded to visit us personally to assess the situation. Meanwhile, we prepared the convent for what could be a direct confrontation. The nuns, those elderly and frail ladies I would never have imagined as warriors, revealed a surprising determination. Sister Agnes organized a surveillance system, with the few remaining novices taking turns to watch the access road. Sister Teresa, despite her arthritis, meticulously checked every lock, every door, every possible entry. The Mother Superior, with her unwavering authority, rehearsed what she would say when, not if, but when Ryan appeared. On the morning of the 3rd day, I was in the laboratory documenting my latest preparations when Sister Agnes ran in. "Mrs. Collins, an ambulance is coming up the road, and there's a black sedan behind it." I felt my stomach sink. Despite all the preparation, the moment of truth had arrived. Ryan was coming to get me, as he had promised. The difference was that this time I wasn't alone and uninformed. I was prepared, determined, and surrounded by allies. The confrontation I had so feared ended up being very different from what I imagined. When Ryan got out of the black sedan, followed by 2 men in white from the ambulance, he found not only the Mother Superior and the nuns at the convent door, but a crowd of people from the village, Professor Nathan with several colleagues from the university, the lawyer Elizabeth with 3 other lawyers, and even a court officer with a document in hand. The surprise on my nephew's face when he saw that reception was something I will never forget. It was a mixture of shock, anger, and fear. All the emotions he had made me feel a year earlier. "Dr. Ryan," said the court officer, stepping forward with the paper in his hand, "I have here a court order temporarily suspending your guardianship over Margaret Grant Collins, pending an independent evaluation of her mental capacity. You are prohibited from removing her from the convent or making any medical decisions on her behalf until further notice." Ryan tried to argue, showed his own court order, but ours was more recent and took precedence. Faced with the hostile crowd and the legal documents, he had no choice but to retreat, but not without casting a look in my direction that mixed hatred and disbelief. That old woman he had discarded like old furniture had somehow managed to assemble an army against him. That was just the beginning of a legal battle that stretched on for nearly 2 years. Professor Nathan, who quickly went from interested researcher to friend and tireless advocate, organized a team of doctors, psychologists, and other professionals to evaluate my cognitive abilities. The results were unequivocal. Not only did I not suffer from any form of dementia, but I had a memory and reasoning ability above average for any age, let alone my 80-something years. The lawyer, Elizabeth, in turn, built a solid case against Ryan. In addition to the evidence of what he had done to me, the investigations revealed a disturbing pattern of similar behavior with other elderly people. In 4 cases, he had manipulated diagnoses and documents to gain control over vulnerable people and their assets. 3 of them had died in circumstances that, if not clearly criminal, were suspicious at best. Only I had survived to tell the tale. My testimony in court was one of the most difficult moments of my life. Ryan was there with his expensive lawyers and his concerned doctor expression. They tried to discredit me in every way possible. They suggested I had hallucinated the episode of the injection in the IV, that I had misinterpreted his intentions, that I was confabulating, a technical term for inventing false memories, common in certain types of dementia. But I was prepared. I answered every question with clarity and precision, without emotional exaggeration, citing dates, names, details that someone with cognitive problems could never remember. The decisive moment was when Ryan's lawyer tried to confuse me about the medications I supposedly took before being interned for my own good. I recited not only the names of the medicines I actually took, but the exact dosages, the times, the possible side effects, and even the name of the pharmacist at the drugstore where I'd bought them for years. And if you doubt my memory, I concluded, looking directly at the judge, I can recite for the court all 28 medicinal formulas I developed during my time at the convent, with their exact proportions, preparation methods, and clinical indications. The lawyer declined the offer, visibly uncomfortable. She just defeated them, using the very weapon they tried to claim was broken: her mind. That perfect, sharp, powerful memory just won her the entire fight. While the legal process ran its slow course, my life took new directions. The convent of St. Clair, which had been my prison, was now my home by choice, at least temporarily. The Mother Superior, in a gesture of reparation for the role she had played in my initial detention, offered a small adjoining building as a permanent space for my work with medicinal plants. "You can stay with us for as long as you wish," she said. "This place may not have been your choice in the beginning, but perhaps it has become your purpose." Professor Nathan proposed a formal partnership between the convent and the University of Missouri. Thus was born the Laboratory of Integrated Traditional Knowledge, a space where the ancestral knowledge of medicinal plants met modern science. I received the title of Associate Researcher, something practically unheard of for someone without formal academic training in the field, especially at my age. I worked side by side with young students of pharmacy, biology, and medicine, who came to learn about the plants and their properties. The irony was not lost on me. I, who had been discarded as useless by my own nephew, was now a valuable source of knowledge for a new generation. The work in the laboratory led to a scientific publication that documented 28 medicinal formulas I had developed during my captivity. Each one was tested according to rigorous scientific protocols with surprising results. My name appeared as the first author, Margaret Grant Collins, followed by Professor Nathan and other researchers who had collaborated on the analyses. Seeing that article published in a respected scientific journal with my name on the cover was one of the greatest satisfactions of my life. It was the definitive validation that my knowledge, a mixture of traditional wisdom from my grandmother Beatrice, Sister Angelica's manuscripts, and my own experience as a nurse, had real scientific value. 3 of the formulas proved particularly promising: anti-inflammatory compounds based on regional plants that had efficacy equal to or greater than synthetic drugs, with fewer side effects. With the help of the university, we patented these compounds. Not to get rich, I insisted that any money be directed to continued research and social programs, but to ensure that the knowledge would not be appropriated by large pharmaceutical companies without proper recognition of its origins. Parallel to the academic research, we developed a training program for rural communities on the responsible use of medicinal plants. I frequently traveled to remote villages, often accompanied by Sister Agnes, who had become a dedicated apprentice. I taught people how to identify, cultivate, and prepare simple but effective remedies for common problems. It's not magic, it's science, I always repeated. And the knowledge is not mine to keep, it's ours to share. Meanwhile, the legal process finally reached a conclusion. Ryan was found guilty on multiple charges: forgery of medical documents, embezzlement, false imprisonment, elder abuse. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He lost his medical license and faced the prospect of several years in prison. As for my assets, the condo in Kansas City, bank accounts, investments, we discovered that about 60% had been squandered. Part was used to buy the convent, part to establish Ryan's new luxurious life, part simply disappeared in extravagant spending. It was at this point that the judge surprised everyone with an innovative sentence. Instead of conventional prison, he proposed a form of restorative justice. Ryan would be sentenced to work for 5 years cultivating the plants that supplied the compounds for the medicines I had developed. Supervised work in a work release program, with the obligation to participate in a re-education program on the dignified treatment of the elderly. Furthermore, he would have to repay what he could of the embezzled money and undergo regular psychological therapy. I am not minimizing the gravity of the crimes, the judge explained, but I believe this form of punishment has greater rehabilitative potential than simple incarceration. Dr. Collins will have to confront the consequences of his actions daily, work for the direct benefit of those he harmed, and perhaps, over time, find a path of genuine repentance and reparation. I confess I had mixed feelings about this sentence. I know what many of you are thinking. Why not prison? That's too easy. And yes, a part of me screamed for that too. But then I thought, pause. Letting him rot in a cell would be too simple. Making him face me, making him work with the very hands that tried to destroy me. That is the true punishment. Don't you agree? Part of me wanted to see Ryan locked up for as long as possible, suffering as he made me suffer. But another part, perhaps the part that had learned about healing during those months in the convent, recognized the wisdom behind the judge's decision. True justice isn't about revenge, but about transformation. It's not about destroying the aggressor, but about restoring the broken balance. I accepted the sentence and committed to doing my part to make it work. Fate, always with its sense of irony, added an unexpected twist to this arrangement. A few weeks after starting to work in the cultivation of the plants, Ryan developed a severe allergy to several of them. His hands became covered in hives, his eyes swelled, his breathing became difficult. Doctors prescribed synthetic antihistamines that barely relieved the symptoms and caused extreme drowsiness, making work impossible. It was then that one of the project's pharmacists suggested a solution. One of my own preparations, developed specifically for skin and respiratory allergies. Ryan resisted at first, of course. The idea of depending on a formula created by the ant he had tried to destroy was unbearable for his pride. But the alternative, failing to complete his sentence and returning to conventional prison, was worse. He ended up accepting the treatment. And it worked. Life has a twisted sense of humor, doesn't it? In the end, to continue his redemption, he had to depend on the useless knowledge of this crazy old woman. Chuckles. My grandmother Beatrice would have had a saying for it. Something about how even the poison needs the antidote. Better than the conventional drugs, without the debilitating side effects. In order to continue his forced redemption work, my nephew depended daily on my knowledge, the very knowledge he had considered worthless, the delusions of a senile old woman. With the conclusion of the legal process and the implementation of the sentence, I could finally think about my own future. I was now 84 years old, an age when many only think about resting and waiting for the end. But I felt more alive, more productive than ever. I recovered part of my assets, enough to live comfortably, although the condo in Kansas City was irretrievably lost. I bought a small house in Kansas City, near the university, where I could continue my research and teaching work. The convent of St. Clair, which had been the stage for so much suffering but also so much discovery, ended up benefiting indirectly from the whole story. The publicity surrounding the case, the medicinal plants, the laboratory in partnership with the university, brought new life to the place. The diocese, which had previously considered closing it for lack of resources and vocations, now saw value in maintaining it as a center for research and education on traditional medicine. New, young nuns began to take an interest in the work, attracted by the unique combination of contemplative life and scientific research. The Mother Superior, with whom I developed an unlikely friendship after everything, told me once, "You transformed our prison into a laboratory, and now you have transformed our laboratory into a future. God writes straight with crooked lines, doesn't he?" I smiled at the wisdom of that observation. Indeed, who could have predicted that my kidnapping and abandonment in that isolated place would end up saving not only me, but the convent itself, and potentially thousands of people who would benefit from the medicines we developed? At this point in my life, looking back to that terrible morning when I woke up disoriented in a cold stone room and forward to everything I still plan to accomplish, I've drawn a few lessons I'd like to share. They aren't great philosophical revelations. I'm too practical a woman for that. They are just simple observations, distilled from a long life, with its joys and tragedies, its victories and defeats. First lesson: prisons are only physical when the mind remains free to create. They can lock up our bodies, limit our movements, but our ability to think, to imagine, to find solutions, remains intact if we don't voluntarily surrender it. In the darkest moments at the convent, when it seemed I would never get out, it was my restless, curious mind, always seeking new knowledge, that saved me from despair. Second lesson: betrayal hurts most when it comes from those we love, but healing can also come from the most unexpected places. Ryan, whom I raised as a son, almost destroyed me. The nuns, who were initially instruments of my imprisonment, ended up becoming allies and friends. The convent, which was my jail, transformed into a laboratory, then a research center, and finally, a legacy. We never know where the hand that lifts us when we fall will come from. Third lesson: hoarded knowledge is a lost treasure. Share what you know before it's too late. If I hadn't meticulously documented every discovery, every formula, every observation during my time at the convent, that knowledge would have eventually died with me. Now it is preserved in books, scientific articles, patents, and most importantly, in the minds and practices of hundreds of people I've taught personally. My grandmother Beatrice and sister Angelica will live on as long as their recipes continue to heal. Fourth lesson: revenge poisons the one who cultivates it first. True justice brings transformation, not destruction. I had many moments when I wished to see Ryan suffer as he made me suffer. But the real victory wasn't seeing him punished. It was seeing the good that was born from that terrible situation. The medicines we developed have already helped thousands of people. The laboratory continues to produce valuable knowledge. And who knows, maybe even Ryan himself, through his forced but potentially transformative work, will find a path to genuine redemption. Fifth and final lesson: at 82, I discovered that it's never too late to start over, and that my greatest contribution came when all seemed lost. If someone had told me when I retired from nursing that my most significant work was still ahead, and that it would come from a situation of despair and abandonment, I would have laughed in disbelief. Yet, that's exactly what happened. Life has these surprises, these twists that seem cruel at one moment, but reveal themselves as blessings in disguise over time. I am Margaret Grant Collins. That name is now the story of how pain was transformed into purpose, and a prison cell became a laboratory. At 85, I still share that purpose. As for Ryan, I see him working, his hands in the dirt, and I hope one day he understands the lesson. He chose destruction, which only consumes itself. I chose healing, which is the only thing that grows and spreads. The human spirit is a force of nature. It can be buried, but it cannot be destroyed. If you were inspired by this story of resilience, I ask you to subscribe to our channel. We are a community built on the power of survival. Thank you for listening.